All right. Okay. Share screen. Okay, I think we're on.
Yeah.
Right. So welcome again to the Better Communication, Better Christmas webinar. And I appreciate that you're here because I know it's building up to Christmas and everybody's busy trying to buy things or organize things. So thank you for being here. Couple of quick announcements. So the next webinar is on the 27th of December, as you may have seen, and that will be on, it'll be a bit of a ritual. We'll go a little bit deeper. It won't be so intellectual, but it'll still involve coaching tools to unwind from 2018 and prepare for the entry into 2019. And then if you're in London, there'll be a leaders circle, which I haven't held for a few months, on the 24th of January at Harley Street. And I will send details in email tomorrow. Today, as always, my mission is to be of service to you and also to a peaceful festive season with your family and loved ones and colleagues and friends, to share experience and insights that I have on better communication. At the end, we'll do some Q&A, maybe some coaching, but probably mostly Q&A. And I'll share any work I do in this area, which you two probably know about anyway. So today we said we talk about the nonviolent communication framework, responding creatively. We said we talk about empathy guesses and boundaries that create more connection, listening with the body, preventing rather than fixing, practices to help connect with people we haven't seen in a long time, and then tools to help stay zen in the midst of chaos. And as you may know, I'm a transformational coach. I help professionals who are feeling maybe a little stuck and want to transform their career, life, or leadership style. I've worked with a range of well-known organizations in the past, and now I coach mostly doctors, lawyers, scientists, experts, consultants, coaches, corporate leaders, and so on. And I suppose I'm kind of known for having taken a career leap in 2016 from working as a doctor in the public sector in a highly structured career, and then into working full-time, building a coaching practice, and a business, which I knew nothing about business before. So it was a steep learning curve. And my aim is to provide people with a pathway into more fulfilling careers and lives, and maybe working independently or coaching others. And in the long term, to contribute to changing the nature of work into something that's more creative, joyful, and fulfilling for all. A few pictures from my past, quite a varied medical experience. So from clinical to humanitarian to policy to and then to coaching. And it was my time in Alaska that really helped me create a big shift in my career. I had a few epiphanies just being out there in the midst of wild, awesome nature and being disconnected from everything except nature and myself. It helped me reconnect with my inner voice and really hear what I wanted to do in the next phase of my career. So, the importance of good communication. I thought we'd start with a video about why it's important to communicate and what happens when we don't, or we're not able to communicate even because we don't know how. So here we go. Can you see the video? Can you see? If you can't see it, let me know.
I can see this. It hasn't started yet.
Okay.
I see the opening. I see the opening picture.
Hello. Can I speak to the sales department? Speak a little clearer. You're not making any sense.
Hope, you really need to work on your phone skills, bud. I'm gonna need you to run over to HR and have a little chat. What do you say?
Hope, do you file the paper of the file cabinet?
relax.
Hey, Hulk, can you change the water bottle?
You idiot!
So did that reach you, the video?
Not the video itself, just the sound, but the picture, the movie didn't show.
Oh no.
All it was the sort of like the first, first slide, as it were, or the first.
Oh.
But you couldn't see it. Nothing moved.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm not sure what to do about that. It worked last time, I think. The imposter syndrome. Well, you probably know the Hulk, and you'll know that his signature emotion is anger. And you may also have noticed, or already have noticed from watching the series or the film, that he doesn't really have language. And so he's quite a frustrated person. And I want to say quickly that when I try to understand these phenomena, how we are in the world, how we behave in the world, how we create our world, I use a lot of my approach from my public health understanding, which is a multidisciplinary approach. So not taking the human being as just looking at the human being through a single lens, but by looking at the human being through multiple lenses and multiple disciplines. And so I understand the human being to be shaped by the environment, but also to have the ability to shape the environment. So in the way the Buddha said, where phenomena arise interdependently. And so that's the approach I'll take. And Ram Dasa was a spiritual teacher, famous in the 70s, famous for having used psychedelics and had spiritual experiences and gone from being a Harvard professor of psychology to being a spiritual leader. It reminded us that it's quite tough to be back in our families of origin and in environments where we are experiencing a lot of intense emotions. And he said, well, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. And he has these funny stories about how he went to India and spent all this time meditating and doing yoga. And then as soon as he'd be with his family or his father, he would regress, essentially. So if it happens to him, it can happen to the best of us. And we should assume really that although we don't know how language was, why it arose, that our instincts today are very much the same as they were 10,000 years ago. So if you look at this picture and just add a Christmas hat, it could be your family gathering this year. So, it's important to put ourselves in context and know that even though we can speak in a very sophisticated language, our instincts are still what they were a long time ago. And be very gentle and compassionate with ourselves. Stephen Karpman came up with this very helpful framework to describe family dynamics or family-like dynamics, which can be reproduced anywhere, including at work. And he had these three roles: the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer, which seem to recur consistently. So one member of the family would be playing one of the roles, and if you're not careful, you would end up taking up one of those roles inadvertently. And you may want to think about which role you tend to take in the family. We do switch around, but there may be one that is more that you take on more habitually. We also know there's lots of research showing that good relationships promote good health, and they lower mortality, they lower incidence of heart disease. People report better health, and they have greater career and financial success. And conversely, having poor relationships has adverse effects. And there's an interesting study, I think, Anne, you're aware of this one as well, where hundreds of Harvard graduates were, of professional graduates were followed up over decades, and their outcomes looked at, and what seemed to determine the best outcomes was good relationships. So we have a few challenges. One is that although we have a sophisticated human brain, we also have the remnants of a mammalian brain and a lizard brain, which help us survive, and they help us feel emotions and situate ourselves and orient ourselves in the environment. It's the human brain, or the neocortex, that does the more complex, sophisticated stuff like language, but also reasoning and rationalizing and empathy, which I'll come back to later. However, the mammalian brain and the lizard brain have been around for much longer, and they've been operating for much longer, and so they're much more powerful, and they tend to kick in much sooner. They also consume less energy than the human brain, so if there's a shortage of energy, or your body feels it's in a survival situation, the human brain is going to get switched off first, unfortunately. And so you're left with your survival instincts to find a solution to whatever your situation is. Another problem we have with our brains is that our perception is always biased. So we think we're rational, but there's lots of experiments showing that we're not. And the interesting thing is that we can be really convinced that we're right, that our side of the story is the correct one, and completely forget that there may be another one, and we may have missed some information. So there's the phenomenon of confirmation bias, where you tend to pick up the facts that confirm the story you already believe. And that's because the structure that does that in the brain is the thalamus. And it's very interesting because it filters information. Its job is to filter information, and it will do it subconsciously. So just pick up on whatever based on what mood you're in. Or you can use your prefrontal cortex and set your filter and say, please pick up information that, that is nice about my parents, for example, or my colleague. And I'll come back to that later. This is a video showing how extreme our misperception can be, but I don't know if it's worth trying it because you can't see the video. Just going to try and click on the photo, see if that works. No. Can you see the video now?
No, there's just a photo of with the link, but the video isn't actually happening.
So you can't see my YouTube screen.
No, just the YouTube link and the photograph, but not the screen.
Okay. All right. Well, I will not do that one. But have a look. It's really interesting. So I won't tell you, otherwise I'll spoil it. But the idea is that our perception, what we think we're hearing, in this case, what we think we're hearing is actually incorrect. And is overridden by what we see. So we can't be 100% sure of what we're seeing in the world. It's constantly interpreted through our filters. One of the most interesting discoveries recently in neuroscience is the mirror neuron. And this seems to be a special set of brain cells that can pick up and understand what's going on in another person without language. So just by seeing what the person is doing, we get to understand how to do it and what it's like to do it. Mm-hmm. And when we see someone having a feeling, we also get to feel that feeling through these mirror neurons. So that's the hypothesis, at least. So that's been proposed as the mechanism for empathy. And the jury's still out there as to exactly how this works. So they're thought to be responsible for imitation, learning, for how children learn language by watching adults, also emotions, empathy, and understanding actions and the intentions of others. So the human brain, the cortex, and especially the prefrontal cortex, is the part that can help us have better communication and better relationships. It needs to be activated in the situations where it is actually likely to be switched off because of the stress or the intense emotion that can come up. What it does is it regulates our behavior. It helps us communicate with attunement, so with an understanding of what the other person is experiencing. It helps with emotional balance, so balancing a sort of a rigid position of, no, this is how it is, versus chaos, as in, oh, I'll just go with whatever. It helps us be flexible in our response. Very importantly, it helps to calm fear or fear modulation. It's the place where empathy is created, possibly through mirror neurons. Is also the place where we have insight into ourselves, or it's sort of self-empathy, because we always assume empathy is empathy with someone else, right? But self-empathy is also a thing, and it's very helpful. It helps with intuition and also with morality. And Dan Siegel is the one who came up with this list. And he talks about, Dan Siegel, he's a professor of neuroscience, but has done a lot of public education around this subject. He talks about the hand model to explain these 3 parts of the brain. So the more primitive brain that gets us to shout, that's the Hulk brain. I just want to say quickly about anger, that if you're used to suppressing anger, it doesn't mean you don't experience anger. And probably need to come into contact again with your anger. But it will be there somewhere. And so the hand model of the brain, it talks about how the thumb is the more primitive brain, and the fingers are the human or more advanced brain. And when we're exposed to stressful situations, let's say you find yourself in a drama triangle and you're trying to stay calm, you're trying to stay rational, there may be a point where you give in, you break, and you flip your lid, you flip your fingers come up, and essentially your human brain has been switched off. And that is not good for communication and for good relationships. And this is what can happen if you have your human brain or neocortex permanently switched off. Your mammalian and lizard brain are in control, and you have no regulation of your impulses and your survival instincts. And you overreact.
Oh my God, this is what's happening in Parliament today, I think.
Yes, it happens a lot. As you can imagine, probably most of society runs on this. And, you two are hope for the future because, or I'll count myself in, being interested in these things, and others are obviously interested in these things, is hopefully what's going to eventually tip the balance. So what the hope is, hoping that we've learned lessons from Donald Trump, and a wide section of the population and of the world will have learned from Donald Trump, is that it's better to respond creatively. And what does that mean? From the brain perspective, it's relying more on our more advanced cognitive functions that are in the prefrontal cortex. But experientially, it's the idea that between the stimulus or the stress and your response, there's a gap. And in that gap lies our power and our freedom. And this was said by Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who escaped, or survived rather, death camp during the Second World War, and went on to set up logotherapy, which is psychotherapy around meaning, which you may have heard of. And so the idea is that we can be responsible rather than reactive. And there's a play on the word there, which is response able. We're able to respond rather than just react from our primitive brain. And Ram Dass uses this interesting analogy of making our relationships a form of yoga. So rather than being a medium of suffering and of reactivity and of human drama, it can be a path to freedom through this awareness around what's possible, the responsibility, and practicing it over and over again as yoga, as you would in yoga, to grow in awareness and grow in spaciousness. So, and here, this is the practical bit. And since there's just the three of us, I wondered if you had any questions or inputs or comments at this point. Or whether I should just carry on and we can debrief after.
I think carry on, but except I would like to see if you could send us the link for those 2 YouTubes which didn't show up. That would be great.
Yes, will do. I'll send a copy of I'll send the recording.
Great, okay.
But
will the recording of Zoom recording, will that have the video on it, because it didn't show?
It has the links, or I can send a copy of the slides if that's easier. But yes, I'll send you. It's not a problem.
I think the link. Hi, it's Mohit here. I think the link will be there in the recording, isn't it? So we can obviously copy the link.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
If I forget, just remind me to send you the links separately if you can't access them.
Yeah.
All right. So nonviolent communication, which is all about responding creatively, using that gap. And keeping our prefrontal cortex engaged and our body calm. And he had this lovely idea around jackal communication and giraffe communication. And he says, if you're a jackal, you'll try to reassure. Jackals try to fix people in pain. They can't stand pain, but make matters worse by trying to get rid of it. So put on giraffe ears and try to hear what they are feeling and needing. So bringing that empathy piece, bringing the prefrontal cortex with its empathy. And I love fixing. I have to rein myself back from fixing because that's just been my rescuer aspect that's been very well developed. I went into medicine. I tried to save the world. Eventually learned that it wasn't the best way. It did have some impact, but there's a much better way, which is this sort of deep and vast self-awareness that brings much more goodness into the world. All right, so the framework he's come up with essentially is around acknowledging needs, the needs of others and our own needs, and having compassion on that. So acknowledging that we're human and that we do have needs for connection, significance, safety, and so on. But also to be responsible for meeting our own needs and not expecting others to meet them automatically. So we can ask for help for others, but it has to be very clear that if they can't help meet that need, we're not victims, we're not helpless, defenseless children, we're adults, and we can be creative in how we meet our needs for safety, connection, significance, and so on. And he has a book, which I recommend, the Nonviolent Communication Framework, if you haven't got it already. If you haven't practiced this, he devised a 4-part process, which I've sort of been a bit creative with here. But essentially, you start with empathy. You start with empathy. So rather than jumping in with a cognitive solution when you see someone suffering or when you start to feel tense, switch your empathy on. So use that gap, use the pause and switch your empathy on and ask, what's going on? What am I feeling here? Or what are they feeling? Start with yourself first, though. Get into the habit, especially if you're a rescuer like me, to ask yourself first how you are feeling. Because if you're feeling angry and you're not owning it, it's going to come out somehow, and it's not going to help. It may even build up and then you'll explode. If that's happened to you, then we're in the same club. Next is kind of describing, trying to put words on the experience. Because when you're tuning in, you may not have the words immediately. You may just notice sensations like a tension in your gut, tension in your jaw, constriction around your chest, like anxiety, or you may feel sadness. Who knows? You may feel all sorts of things. And it's okay to not name it immediately. The important thing is that you tune into it. Then you describe it, or try and describe it in words. And this is where the empathy guess comes in, because we're not trained necessarily. Most of us are not trained in this kind of work, and really owning and acknowledging how we feel. We're taught to think, but not to feel, or not to be with our emotions and feelings. So try and take a guess as to either how you feel, which with practice, it won't be a guess. You'll be pretty good at it if you keep practicing naming how you feel. But if it's for another person, then yes, it will be a guess, and it's worth it. So the idea is that you're trying to understand what's going on for that person. And you're not judging them. You're trying to understand. And you can do things to try and understand what they're feeling, which is ask them. But be very careful in how you do it if the person is in a state of high emotional intensity or stress. Be very gentle and open and soft. Then you state how you feel and or what you need. So if you're, and I don't know if the video will work, but you'll get the link anyway. There's an example of how this works between a woman and her mother in terms of doing that, kind of tuning into how they feel, how you feel, and then stating what you need. And you may need space, or you may need, in the example, well, we'll come to the example in a minute. But you state your need. You turn a complaint or a grievance or anger into a request, which is the fourth step. So, and the request is really where you're asking the person to help meet your need. So if you need to take a break, then that would be your request. So let's do an example. I always use the one of being late. So if a person is late, then you would tune in and empathize with yourself, thinking about, well, yeah, I'm feeling a little stressed. I'm feeling a little angry, maybe. I feel a little disappointed, frustrated. And you'll notice that as you say that, it will help you stay calm. When they arrive, if they do it, well, we're assuming this is sort of a pattern. It's not a one-off. So when they arrive, or when there's an opportunity to talk about it, you might describe the facts, which is, when you are late, I notice that you're frequently late when we meet. So that's not something they can dispute. It's a fact. It's an observation. In this case, you don't need to necessarily go into an empathy guess for them. You can just go straight into how you feel, which is, when you are late, I feel sad, or I feel frustrated. And then what you need would be, I would like it if you could tell me in advance if you're going to be late, or I would like you to be on time. Yeah, then the need and the request are kind of merged, because the need is the same as the request. If you wanted to separate them, the need could be, I need information, or I need to be able to manage my time the way that works for me. And then the request would be, would you be willing to let me know in advance when you know you're going to be late? Something like that. I think the video would have been more fun. Let's see. Oh, name it to tame it. So that's the idea of, once you've tuned in to your experience, before you've given it words, that's one stage. And then naming it really activates your prefrontal cortex. It really engages, it keeps that connection with the prefrontal cortex, engaging your rationality. So you might say, I'm feeling angry. It could be describing a sensation. I have a tight wall of nerves in my gut. And then an empathy guess would be, I'm noticing that you're very quiet. I'm wondering if what I said upset you. Rather than just sort of letting it slide. If you're noticing something, you're demonstrating empathy by saying that you noticed what they're going through and trying to understand them. A word on boundaries. Boundaries, one definition is where you end and another person begins. And in a way, when you're stating needs, some of those will be boundaries. So if you say, I need time, or I need to take a break, or I need to talk about this later, your need is essentially a boundary. You're putting a boundary in place to support yourself. And it helps to create more safety and space for you, possibly the other person as well. If they're very angry and you say, let's talk about this later, you're helping them as well, because they're not going to be rational. And if you're a coach or you're highly interested in personal development, then you will be the more conscious person usually. So you can't really rely on other people to do the conscious or self-aware things. It can be a little frustrating to start with, but then you just get used to it. And so creating that safety and space creates time for you to attune and respond to a situation more creatively and wisely. Boundaries can sometimes make us uncomfortable, especially if we love connection and we love being connected to people, because it does create a disconnect in the short term. You're disengaging from a dynamic. So yes, there is a disconnect there. But it's worth it because it creates healthy connection in the medium and long term. So this can be done on the micro level, sort of in the moment, or it can be done with a long-term dynamic that hasn't been very healthy for a while, to say, let's take a little break. But always give a timeline for when you're ready to reconnect. Unless it's a really, really bad dynamic with, let's say, with narcissists, sometimes the advice given is to just cut off and not try to re-engage again. But that's a pretty extreme situation. So empathy in action, empathy guesses as well. Again, a couple of tips. When you're making a request, it always helps to acknowledge the positive intent of the other person's actions. So even if they've done something that you think is really not nice, in the communication, in trying to practice empathy, guess what might be good, or sort of give them the benefit of the doubt, I suppose, is a bit of an empathy guess. It's along the same lines. You would acknowledge, say, oh, I realize that, when you're trying to do this, you may be trying to help me. When you're trying to fix me, you may be trying to help me. And then make your request. Tony Robbins talks about how to never assume negative intent for anyone, because it causes damage in the relationship and it doesn't help with your aim. Receiving a request. So if you're on the receiving end, so someone has got a grievance against you and they want something from you, they're trying to ask you for help in meeting their needs. It can be easy to sort of get defensive, right? And say, no, I didn't do that, or I don't know what you're talking about, or of course, no, you completely misunderstood. It helps to start with acknowledging the impact, just factually acknowledging the impact of your action on the other person. So you could say, and you can just reflect back what they said in a calm way. So what you're saying is that when I turned around and I knocked the glass, it fell on your shoes, and now you're going to have to get them cleaned. I mean, someone might think that's a big deal and you think it's not a big deal, but it will help the communication if you just acknowledge the impact for them before launching into anything else. One definition of empathy, yes, is holding off on presenting your side of the story until you have made a genuine effort to understand what the other person is saying. And some people may go as far as saying until you can state the other person's side of the story to their satisfaction. So you keep asking questions and repeating and understanding and reflecting back until they say, yes, yes, that is how I feel. And you'll notice it opens up the conversation. So I had an example for you. I think we can hear it. We can probably hear it. So would you like to hear the dialogue, or do you want to just watch the link later and then have more time for questions?
How long is the dialogue?
I think it's 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, let's look at it.
Okay.
Let's listen to it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I haven't been getting very many good cases lately. You know that time I took off because the boys were sick, and, you know, I got dropped from that one. And then
Your boss dropped you from that one because your boys were sick?
Yeah,
Oh, you know, you should do it with that guy. I mean, he is such an ass. I mean, I can't believe it. You really need to have a talk with him. You need to go in his office, sit him down, and straighten him out. I mean, he can't be treated that bad.
Yeah, I mean, he's not that bad. It's just, you know, it's just
Not
like
that bad. He's not giving you the good cases, and you're so smart. I mean, you really need to tell him, you know, how to treat you. But people only treat you the way you let them treat you, right? So you need to go in and teach him.
you know, it's just, that's what happens a lot. You know, when you're working on a case, it's got a deadline. They're not going to stop for you. And so if you can't come through, you know, they can drop you. And that's what happens.
So then you should get another job. I mean, you're going to live. How can you do that? Selena, work in an office like that. I mean,
So, you know, my mom and I could go on for hours with her advice to me. But I think that I'm going to go, you know, with what Simon's been doing, this nonviolent communication thing, check in with myself. What do I need? I need to be heard. I just need her to hear me. I don't need her advice. So I should check in with her and see what's going on with her. You must be really worried about me, are you?
yeah, I am. Sweetie, you spent so many years going to school, and now you're in this place where they're treating you badly? I mean, that's just terrible. That's just not acceptable.
It's kind of feel horrible seeing me go through something
Oh, I can't
difficult.
stand that. I mean, I know how hard you work, and then you go home to the kids. You know, it's like, do you ever get a break? I just, you know, I worry with your health, that you're being overstressed, and not having any time to yourself. I just can't stand to think of people treating you unfairly and badly. It just breaks my heart.
Thanks for looking out for me. You really want me to be doing well.
And I want you to be treated well by everybody in your life. I just want to see you, you know, struggling and being disrespected. I mean, you don't deserve that. You deserve, you know, the best.
Thanks, Mom. I appreciate you always looking out for me.
Yeah. Really
Can I tell you something real quick? Like, when I talked to you, I realized that what I really wanted was just to be able to talk and kind of get it off my chest and have you hear me. And I don't think I'm ready for a solution or strategies of what I need to do next. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to make the change at work that I need to. I feel like I just need to get it off my chest with you. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
If I just talk to you and you just kind of listen.
Yeah, just a sounding board kind of thing.
Yeah.
You really don't want advice right now.
Not really. Thank you, though.
Oh, sure. I can do that.
Thanks, Mom.
All right. So did that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you're speaking for.
I'm the only one that's speaking at the moment, so.
Yes. I hope everybody else is also getting.
Yeah, it made sense. Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Great. And so you noticed how she there was a break in the middle where she tuned in and she said, I don't actually want advice, I just want a sounding board. I want someone to hear me out.
Yeah.
And she first acknowledged the positive intent and made an empathy guess and say, oh, you're kind of worried about me. Oh, that's really nice. Thank you. And the mom was just like relaxed. And she's like, yeah, I am worried about you. I want you to do really well. And, you know, that created connection. And then after that, she said, can I tell you something really quick? You know, I really just need you to hear me right now. And that's how she got her need met. So, listening with your body, a note on listening with your body. Obviously, if you're tuning into yourself, you are more in tune with what's actually going on. You're not just making up a scenario in your mind, making assumptions. You're feeling what's going on, and that is a form of listening. And 93% of communication is nonverbal, from the studies that have been done on this, and Maharabian. So if you pay attention to not just the content of what people say, but their voice, including the tone, the pitch, the speed, but also their body, is it open, is it collapsed, tense, the face, what position are they taking, are they facing you, are they moving away from you? That gives you a lot of information on what's going on. And even if, combined with your felt sense, that's loads to go on to prevent things from escalating or disasters from happening. So if you are able to do that and you're tuning into yourself rather than reacting to anything, then you've got more space to breathe, allow your experience, allow for other people's experience. And a great way to do that if you're in an intense family gatherings, especially if it's over several days, is to give yourself space to breathe and allow your experience and take quality breaks. So plan them in. Because what happens is when we're engaged in the dynamics, we can get locked in and it's hard to break away. So try and plan in some breaks so that you can keep in tune with yourself and others more easily. And it doesn't mean you have to just go and sit in a room on your own. Being in a quiet space if you need to is great, but something that's different and breaks whatever dynamic is already going on, just shifts your state, helps you shift your state, as Tony Robbins says, or anything that's joyful and fun. That will also help to de-escalate any stress response you're experiencing. And I'm talking about genuine laughter, not sort of sarcastic or forced laughter. And then you've got the tools, the nonviolent communication, once you've managed to self-regulate, as it were, and keep your prefrontal cortex online. Reconnecting after a long time. So sometimes when we go to family gatherings, we haven't seen people for a long time. And I was just thinking how much time, I don't know about you, but how much time we spend preparing for talks, how stressed we are about them, compared to how much time we spend preparing for when we're going to meet our family or meet our older relatives or children, if we're not used to children or whatever. I'm not used to children that much these days. And we don't spend enough time preparing. In the past, there used to be rituals. There were ritualized ways of meeting again, of having a gathering, of reconnecting. And there were ritualized ways of relating to the elders, of relating to the young ones, of relating to different members of the family. And we've lost that, and we're just thrown into these highly charged situations without any preparation or equipment. So one thing you can do is to do a little mental rehearsal and create your own ritual, thinking who will be there. Reconnect with them through a positive memory of them. Set an intention for how you'd like things to unfold, how you envision things unfolding from the mood of that positive memory of them. And try and visualize in advance. I mean, it works for athletes, it works for performance at work. Why wouldn't it work for things we really care about and they're really important, like relationship encounters? For if you've got really difficult relationships, remember the 6 human needs, or remember that they're human beings as well with needs, and they're just trying to get their needs met. They may be really loud, they may be really provocative, they may just have a need for significance that wasn't met from childhood. And remember that they were children once, and that can help soften and engage our empathy for them. See them as little children, people who you find very challenging, and see if that helps. All right, a quick tool for staying zen, which is the 4 R's, and you can find online easily, but brings together what we've been talking about around recognizing what's going on. So recognizing your state, recognizing the other person may be in a state of need or dependence or activation. They may be highly stressed and completely disconnected from their prefrontal cortex. So just recognizing what's going on and how you feel and what needs of yours are coming up and that need to be met is the first step. Then refrain. So that's coming back to the idea of the gap. Create a break. Honor the need for a gap so that you don't react but respond. And that is totally creative. It's up to you. Knowing how you would normally react, for example, for me, by rescuing means, remember not to rescue. Remember to pause, go and get a glass of water, change the subject. And if you still want to rescue, you can do it later. But if you don't, then see what happens. So once you created that gap, make sure you relax, which is what I was talking about, just taking that break and giving yourself some space to come out of that threat, that survival kind of activation, the limbic system kind of starting to boil. So relax so your prefrontal cortex can stay online and your empathy is still working. And then resolve, which is great because it just means resolve to stay awake, resolve to keep doing this process, resolve to keep doing your part of the work, being tuned into yourself, tuned into others, and responding creatively. So as a quick recap, empathy is the key for yourself first, and then for others. Listen with your body, not just with your ears and your rational mind. Name it to tame it. So name your experience. That keeps your higher cognitive functions engaged. Set boundaries, for example, by taking breaks. Create your own rituals for re-engaging with your family or colleagues or whoever. And then the 4 R's. And then hopefully, if Dansa's meditating and having a good time, you can too. So that's it. So just a reminder of the events coming up, which I will send. And then if any of you are looking to try transformational coaching in 2019, then I'm opening up for the roster for 2019. So if you want an exploratory conversation, then please email me and we'll see if we're a good fit and how working together would look like. And thank you from me. Thank you for being here, for your attention and commitment to this work. So I'm going to stop this share, and I should come back online, and so should you. So we said we'd finish at 7, but I'm happy to stay until another 10 minutes because we started late. If you need to leave, that's fine. And if you have any questions, input, insights that you want to share, this is the time. And let me see if I can bring you back. Or just jump in if you want to say something. Anybody want to share?
Amina, can I ask you a question, please? It's Nikki.
Hi, Nikki.
Hello. Around empathy versus, or empathy and compassion.
Yes.
And how different energy is used when with empathy and compassion, and what you think about that.
Yeah, great question. I think there's no sort of consensus around exactly how these things are defined. So I kind of turn to the Buddhist approach and use empathy to mean loving kindness, the quality of loving kindness, which is this kind of friendliness to ourselves and to others, so accepting, warm quality. And then if you take that quality and it meets suffering, it transforms into compassion. So the empathy or the loving kindness is kind of a default mode that we should, in Buddhism at least, you kind of work on and develop to accept ourselves, accept others, be in tune with ourselves, be in tune with others. And when it interacts with suffering, it becomes compassion. And with compassion, I've heard Sam Harris, who's a neuroscientist, talk about how you don't even need to feel the feeling with compassion, because if you're a friendly, if you've got that kind, warm, friendly quality, you'll naturally know the wise step to take with that person, which would be a compassionate response. So it's the idea that with compassion, you don't actually need to feel the feeling. It's your active response that's more important. I don't know if that answers your question. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. What do I think? I went to a really interesting lecture by the man who is a monk, who's the one that is the monk of happiness, the happiest man in the world. I can't remember what his name is.
Mathieu Ricard, the French guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And well, he spoke about empathy. Sorry, my dog's really small. He spoke really interestingly about empathy and compassion. They did. He was involved in some tests, some scientific tests around empathy and compassion, and where they did that, where it used the compassion used less of his energy than empathy. And after half an hour of practicing empathy, he was utterly kind of like wrung out completely. You know, he couldn't manage anymore. But the idea that there was that kind of separation with passion allowed him more energy, allowed the other person agency and him agency, and there was a kind of it was more productive, basically, is what
yeah, that makes sense, because with empathy the idea is that you, by definition, you are empathizing and feeling, right? Whereas with compassion, as I was trying to explain, that you don't have to take on the feeling. So you can be kind, right? You can be kind without feeling the pain, the sadness, the anger. Let's say when you're watching a movie and you start to take on the emotions and you cry and so on, that takes up energy. Whereas if you just recognizing, let's say, what's going on and not pushing away from it, not running into it, you're being compassionate. But not using up your own energy to feel the experience of the other person.
And that seems to be what you were talking about in the first, I can't remember at what point in this like the first bit when you said about you empathize before you go into, oh God, my brain's completely gone. Like before you go into the empathy guessing, it sounded, when you were kind of describing that first bit of empathy, it sounded almost like you were talking about compassion, because you were giving the other person you're kind of giving the other person agency in that. So it's it was like empathy stroke compassion, because the other rather than, as you say, rather than jumping in, you were allowing the other person agency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Amina, can I ask something as well?
Of course. Is that Mohit?
Yeah, hi.
Hi there.
Yeah, basically I was going to say that, what do you think about this empathy and compassion towards somebody who is has got tendencies of abusing the other person? So for example, most of the people would respond positively if you exercise empathy and compassion towards them. But then once in 100 people or once in 50 people, you'll come across somebody who will continue to abuse this quality in you, and they will but you still think that he is doing something which is unacceptable and wrong, like abusive behavior, but I need to continue be compassionate towards them because that is what is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's got to be some line where you need to know that this person, it's not working, practicing compassion and empathy, because they're actually continuing to abuse you and take advantage of you, and it's not once or twice or thrice, it's like over a long period of time. And you keep hoping that the other person will change and improve their behavior, because you're setting an example and you're basically but that never happens. And there are very rarely personalities, because I previously used to think that if you are good to others and you practice compassion, empathy, you will never, obviously, the other person, even if initially they have negative tendencies towards you, they will hopefully turn positive. And I've, in my personal life, I've seen that a lot, that even if somebody is bad to you, if you continue to be good to them and kind to them, eventually they sometimes quite promptly they will reciprocate and your relationship will be great. But then there are some people who never will reciprocate, who are so should you continue to suffer abuse and continue to practice compassion, or you should recognize that you should recognize that line, but then you might feel that, oh, actually I didn't practice compassion, because after a while I stopped practicing compassion because I just like fell out with that person or stopped relationship with that person. So it kind of feels that you've lost faith in that your belief in practicing compassion and empathy in that case. So I don't know how to. So sometimes people advise you that why are you continuing to suffer abuse from that person? It's clearly doing wrong to you.
Yes.
But then your inner self, like when you say this Buddhist feeling or guidance you get, inner guidance, conscience, that says that no, you should continue to practice compassion and empathy, and like you said, that very interesting sentence, that you practice yoga in your life by so for example, if you continue to have a relationship with a difficult person, whether it's professional or personal, who is abusing you clearly or being not good to you, despite your positive, kind actions, then you are in a way practicing yoga and like virtuous life. But then you're also suffering, and it's destroying your self-esteem, your personality.
Well, first I want to say,
find that balance. I
want to say that I'm sorry if you're experiencing that, because I've experienced that, and it's very painful. And so I just want to acknowledge that is a difficult situation, and many people have faced it, and I believe you don't have to suffer. Empathy and compassion aren't about suffering. Maybe you suffer here and there because we all have to learn to be more compassionate, but not consistently. If it's consistent, then there's something that's not right. And so sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to take a break or to separate. Otherwise, you're doing what's called enabling the other person to continue to be blind and unconscious, right? There's this idea that Nikki brought in around agency. They have to take responsibility for their actions. It doesn't mean you're not compassionate or don't have empathy, but it might mean you use your wisdom to take different types of behaviors and actions around that person, right? So if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and it's creating more suffering for you, then it's time to pause, take a break, take some distance, take some space, to have empathy and compassion for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Ask yourself, are you trying to fix that person really by trying to show empathy? Ask yourself, is this really the wisest thing? Because otherwise empathy on its own is deregulated. If you show empathy for everybody on the planet indiscriminately in the same way, you're not going to live very long. And that's not I don't believe that's the intention around having empathy and compassion. Does that make sense, or what's your, how did that land with you?
No. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult situation, and if it's somebody who's like a close one, then it's even harder because it's not easy to separate or just go away from that relationship. So
yeah, especially if it's habitual and it's a person who's close to you, it can be uncomfortable to.
Yeah, and it's also like a bit against like these notions of positive thinking, faith, because sometimes I try to take the positive side of that situation, but I think that's kind of hoping against hope when it's you know when it's when you just it's gone too far and it's not working. You've tried for several years, and
it sounds like you have your answer already. My sense is it's very tough, it's very difficult and challenging, but you have a sense of what would be wise. And in mindfulness, we talk about the two wings. So there's compassion or loving kindness on one side, so where empathy and all those good things are, but there's also wisdom and insight on the other, and they have to go together. So the mind and the heart have to work together to make the best decisions.
Wise decisions,
the wise decisions. So I would say look after yourself, tune into yourself and apply compassion and empathy to yourself if you've given a lot to the other person already, and listen to your wisdom. Sometimes compassion means wielding the sword of justice or wisdom and cutting through a dynamic. Right? I know that's quite a dramatic image, but it's helped me in the past to think of it that way. It's kind of a sword of justice. Not to kill, but to stop a dynamic.
Yeah, and obviously it's very easy to prematurely reach this conclusion that you are being abused because but I'm sure that I've spent like years and years try to make sure in my mind that actually, because I try to see others' viewpoint as well, that they might be thinking the same about me, that I'm not behaving well. So I've analyzed all that for a long time and made sure that I'm not just being unfair or
I'm sure it sounds like you're a very patient and kind person. So that your intuition, what I'm sensing in you, your intuition is that something needs to change. And sometimes when you have the courage to make that change, that's when the answers come and things can improve. So it's kind of like letting go for things to right themselves. But I don't want to make any assumptions because it sounds like a complex situation, and I don't feel I know enough. But does that help for now?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahir. Thanks for sharing that with us. All right. So if anybody's got anything that they want to share over a couple of minutes, please do. Otherwise, I think it's time to wrap up. Please come to the New Year's Rituals webinar on the 27th if you're free. And otherwise, I look forward to being in touch by email and seeing you another time.
Great. Thank you, Amina.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a
Thank you very
wonderful Christmas.
Lots of
Thank you.
love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.